Hello and welcome to this week's video. Now, just to let you know, or just actually it's just a reminder, the videos are going to be switching over from the content. Previously, it's been about your first speeches. Since we are in speech weeks for all the classes, the content that would be discussed in the classroom is going to be moved to these videos. And this is the content that will help you with your book. Today's video covers chapters 11 to 12. And so keep that in mind when we're doing it. This is about getting you ready for the midterm. And that's a good thing because a lot of the stuff that we're covering for chapter 11 and 12, you already know because you're in the middle of your first speech. So what I'm going to do for this one right now is I'm going to go ahead and put up the slides for these chapters. Now, I'm going to be skipping the first part of chapter 11, and you'll see why in a moment, because it has to deal with your question for this week, participation question for this week. So let's go in the share screen. And so chapter 11 covers speech patterns and how to lay them out. The first section is the speech patterns. But the second section, I have part of my kitchen. You can see that I wash my dishes. Anyways, the second section covers things that indicate what sections you are, how you're laying out your pattern for your narrative, and all that stuff. Now, the reason why we're glossing over this stuff is because you know a lot of this stuff already. Look up the definitions, of course, because you're going to get questions on it. So, for example, as you always know, I always like to get the official definition from the books, but from the book. And you would think I would have it queued up already. Anyways, so for example, signpost. Signposts are organizational cues for your audience's ear. Signposts include previews, transitions, and summaries. Well, guess what? We've already covered all this stuff because we had to get you ready for your first speech. So we did the transition exercise, previews, I call them roadmaps. Review, when you review your main points in the conclusion, that's just going over your roadmap again. Just remember the stuff. Just convert the terms and the phrases we use in your speeches for this part. Now, when you are organizing in your speech patterns, there's a couple things to remember, and I'm going to cover evidence and subpoints. And that idea is pretty basic. It's the idea that you keep your evidence, and this includes your reasoning and your logic and your arguments and your pitches and your informative information into your main points. And when you organizing your evidence, when you choose your speech pattern, you kind of group them in a way that helps fit into the speech pattern, which we'll cover in a bit. But for example, if you're using chronological, obviously your evidence would be in some kind of historical order or some kind of instruction order. So that's how that works. Your evidence and so forth should be part of that narrative. It's kind of like when you build a case. You see TV shows when they build cases. That's kind of the thing. You're building the narrative with how you lay out your evidence. And you already did this. This is easy for you because you did your first speech was past, present, and future. So most students in their speeches, when they use a culture community reference, they did it in their past. That's when they chose to put that evidence in their past. One of the many reasons why I have that reference requirement. So keep that in mind when you're laying it out. And your subpoints is where you're going to have the meat and potatoes of the evidence and reasoning. Because the main point, the first part of the main point is just a summary of the main point. And it's when you group them into the two, subpoint A, subpoint B, that's when you lay out your evidence and reasoning. That's why I always tell you one subpoint should be a theme, like for example, an explanation of a concept, and then subpoint B would be like the evidence. That's how that works. And then you coordinate it with the idea of a pattern. It's actually very easy once you have your map, your narrative chosen. But it's just something to keep in mind. So look up these terms. And these are, again, things, previews, transitions, summaries. You've already been doing this in your speeches. You're good. You're good at this. Just remember the terms for your test. And then chapter 12 is just how do you set up for it? And that is, of course, putting in an outline form. We covered outlines already, speaker notes and so forth. And it's just the roadmap that you set up in your speech at the end of your intro, at the beginning of your conclusion, the signposts, the transitions, outline forms. I always say, do not write it out. Do not write out your speech. Just write out a basic outline. Remember the attention getter, that little combo we learned in that one video where you had the participation, where your attention getter should relate to your memorable closer. That's a way for your audience to know you wrapped it up, is to have them combine. These are all signposts, and you can form these easy narratives, these things that help your audience figure out what you're doing in your outlines. There's speaking notes, things I'm telling you to write down for your speeches. Of course, I've said this in class already. Print out your outline, write it out, learn how to elaborate, be able to think of additional things if you need to add more for your time. Support and citation. The second speech, we're going to be focusing on citation and how to research for it. And of course, the cues to your audience and so forth. Read this stuff in chapter 12 and so forth. I'm going to get out of share screen real quick because I'm going to queue up the thing real quick. They're going to have me up close again. But it's also, these are just things. Now, it goes into the idea of patterns and why patterns are important. And the reason why patterns are important, speech patterns, is because you want to help your audience. You want to help yourself and you want to help your audience. The patterns that we're going to be covering, the five, let me count them again, the 5 patterns that we're going to be covering today are things that your audience will recognize. They're concepts, they're human concepts that we identified. Chronological, we understand time and the metric of time and order. Topical, what's most important from A to B to C. I'm sorry, main point 1 to main point 3. Topical, the idea of importance. Spatial is distance and direction. It's cause and effect. What the effects were, here's the cause and all that good stuff. And problem solution. Here's a problem, folks. I have the solution. See how this works? Not only is it help you as a speaker develop your speech and put it in a thing that will help you, but it will help your audience follow along. That's why speech patterns are so important for you to be a successful speaker. These are mostly used for informative and persuasive. Entertainment, ceremonial speeches usually don't have patterns, or more informal, but it's good to just understand each of them. And you already know one of them very well because it was your first speech, and that's informative. So let's go ahead and get back into that slide, because my face up close, I didn't shave. I completely understand why. So here we have the terms, that the meat and potatoes of chapter 11, which is the different kinds of organizational patterns. The speech patterns that we're going to be covering is topical, chronological, spatial, cause, effect, problem, solution. I know the book writes out cause and effect, problem, solution a little bit different than I do. It's the way I do it. Other books have done it that way too. So that's the way I do it. But anyways, so don't get confused if you see it different in the book. It's the same definition, all right? The thing is it's important to remember these organizational patterns for your speeches, but also for your audience. In your first speech, you're doing an informative speech about your future planning, how you got there. You did that with a speech pattern. The speech pattern you use is the first one we're going to discuss, which is, well, actually, we're going to, we're going to do it a little bit different, is chronological. Chronological is, oh, by the way, you can find the write-up and the extra information and so forth to read along with and pages. But we're going to set topical aside for a second. Chronological is the pattern which is about order. Um, Example of this is what you did, past, present, and future. How you're going to get to your future. You use a chronological organizational speech pattern where you are telling your audience, this is my past, here's my present, and this is my future. Same thing if you're doing a speech about history or anything of that nature. How to bake a cake, how to put together a bicycle. These are time or order sensitive subjects. So you would use a chronological because you wouldn't want to take it place out of order. You can use trips. For example, you got to go here first and this and this. If there was some kind of procedure, but for the most part, trips and stuff like that goes into the next one, which is spatial organization. Spatial organization is the organizational pattern that is about direction. It's about placement on the map or a structure in a building, or as the book points out, an atom. I like to say it's proximity. I'm gonna just a simple thing here. This is why I have the dry erase board today. Let's see if I do this right. It's Let's see if I, there we go. It's a proximity towards the speaker, is what I like to say. So if you were doing points on a map, usually you would do the points to the central area and going in that direction. You know, people have done it where they did the trip backwards, but for the most part, it's going from in to out. Same thing with the structure of a situation. You usually go something of a certain direction in spatial, and that's important. Proximity in relation to what you're trying to do. It is probably the most difficult of the patterns. Chronological is the easiest, spatial is the most difficult, but it is something that is available to you. The next one is cause and effect. We're going to cover informative, persuasive speech patterns in a second, but cause and effect is one that kind of, it can be both. And what you're trying to do to your audience is telling them about, you're actually thinking about the effect overall in your speech. This is something that problem solution has too. The last main point is where you're ending up. So that's usually the effect. And so you're laying out the causes to get to the last main point, which is the effect. The difference between informative persuasion is whether you're just trying to tell somebody that it's already been a proven cause and effect, and you're just being informative of how to get there, or persuasive where you're trying to convince them that is the cause, those causes, you know, made that effect, created that effect. Difference between persuasive and informative here is informative is just you're reporting something that is known. Persuasive, you are trying to you're trying to persuade somebody of something they don't know of a cause and effect relationship. Problem solution is pretty much an exclusive persuasion, unless you're being informative of a past problem solution situation. Most of the time, problem solution is persuasive, and that is you're telling somebody, here's the problem, here's the solution. All right, again, look at pages for more examples and stuff like that. But that's what problem solution is. It is telling your audience, this is the problem and here's the solution. I have the solution. All right, and keep that in mind when you're choosing. And the last one we're going to cover, because it's the most in-depth, and it's the most popular informative speech pattern, is topical. Topical, let me give the official definition, as always, as I like to do. Natural divisions are often basically equal in importance. Speeches are in diverse topics as factors considered which in selecting speeches. Oh wait, your central idea has natural divisions. You often organize them, your speech topically. And what that means by the divisions is it's usually of importance. The key to topical um, is usually main point one, main point two leads into main point three. And this is why it's important. Um, Topical has three terms, and those terms are up there: primacy, recency, complexity. And again, the definition, if you're using topical, you have to know these terms to understand how to organize. And it's not hard. Primacy is the principle of primacy. Discuss the most important or convincing idea first. So you put it, the thing that you want them to know first, and then that leads into things that they're least familiar with. So the most important thing up front, and then you're informing them. So that leads into the main point, because primacy is what you know first, the most important thing, and that leads into the unfamiliar or the new information. All right, or not as important. You like, take this for example. Primacy. I know this is important up top, but did you know about these things? Main point two, main point three. Primacy. This is what you already know. This is of great interest. Main point one, main point two, main point three. This is other things to know. Recency. According to principle of recency, the point discussed last is the one the audience remembers the best. This is the way the setup was. The main point three is like the most important, but it's the most memorable. So primacy is something they're familiar with that they're going to leave. Recency is the last thing, is the shock value. It's the thing that you're going to bring home to them. Sometimes there's a mix of those two together, especially if you're dealing with something that is very familiar and you're leading to something unfamiliar. Some people might take the familiar and remember that the most, and the unfamiliar remember that the most. But it is a speech pattern for topical. And the last one, complexity, the main point range from simple to complex and complexity. And that is just, again, an easy way to explain something, and so forth. The reason why building something is in chronological, because chronological, you have to do it in a certain order. Topical allows for, when you're explaining something with complexity, to explain big concepts. It doesn't have to be in order, but simple understanding to the most complex. As long as there's no, you have to do this order, then topical is where you want to go with that kind of stuff. All right. Now, I know there's a lot of questions about this, and so I'm going to answer. I'm saving this for last. So, like I said, the most used one for your speeches. I'm going to go ahead and get out of share screen. But yeah, I'm going to have this in front of me. So the most used one so your first. I'm sorry. Let me go back a second. Your next speech is informative. Your third speech is persuasive. So let me explain which speech patterns work for which of them. And I kind of talked about this a little bit already. Topical is the most selected, most popular speech pattern for informative, because there's a lot of flexibility in it. You have the three different ways to do it, and topical pretty much gives the speaker their choice to what to put in their main points, how to organize their main points. But the primacy, recency, and complexity helps give the speaker an idea of what to shoot for. A lot of flexibility, and there's three terms that help the speaker put it there. That's why it's the most popular. Chronological is an informative one. It is, and just like topical and chronological is mostly used in informative, it is something that is very easy. Out of the speech patterns, chronological is the easiest. But let me just say this real quick. You already have done chronological speech pattern. I dissuade or wish that students would not use it again. The only way a student is allowed to use a chronological speech pattern for their second speech is if their topic requires a chronological speech pattern. If it doesn't require it, use the other ones, the other options, which are topical, spatial, and cause and effect. But for the most part, chronological is the easiest, but you've already done it. So unless your speech requires chronological, use either topical, spatial, or cause and effect. That leads into spatial. Spatial is the hardest to use in the informative, but it is unique. It makes speeches unique. It can be actually pretty easy if you're just talking about trips or planning, you know, that kind of structure, that proximity to the speaker. You can go odd and obscure with spatial, but it is probably one of the most difficult ones to do. So it is the most difficult one to do for informative and mostly used for informative speeches. Cause and effect is the only one that can be used in persuasive and informative quite easily, that I allow for the informative speech, your second speech. And but you got to make sure if you use cause and effect that you're just being informative about it, something that's already known. You're not trying to prove something new or convince something of it, or get into controversial. So if you choose cause and effect, make sure your topic is not controversial. Nothing that you're trying to push an agenda or trying to be persuasive on. In fact, all the possible topics that you can choose from, you should try to stay away from controversy or so forth when you're choosing your second speech. Problem solution is pretty much entirely persuasive. You are not allowed to use problem solution on your second speech. You can, like I said earlier, you can use it for informative, but it's very restrictive. So you are not allowed to use it for your second speech. In your second speech, you're allowed to use topical, chronological, spatial, cause and effect. All right. Those are the 4 options for you. You can use any of them for your informative speech, all right? And so that leads into, oh, and by the way, your persuasive is only going to be problem solution, all right? So that leads into topics. And what you're going to do for today's speech participation is actually pretty easy. There are going to be some topics that you're not allowed to do in informative, like because I've heard it too much, like cartels and serial killers. Don't try. I have had students sneak in serial killers, so don't even think about it. But anyways, there's another topic that it's going to be off limits for this year, and that's coronavirus. Coronavirus is going to be off topic because I think too many students will want to do it, and there's so many different ways to do it that it will just be too much. So coronavirus and anything with the virus is not allowed. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at the speech patterns that you can use: topical, chronological, spatial, cause and effect. And I want you to think about coronavirus as a topic and just write out the speech pattern in a sentence, just saying how you would use that speech pattern in a coronavirus speech, how you would organize with it. You can't see anybody else's replies until you post your own. So I'll say it again: topical, chronological, spatial, cause and effect. Coronavirus is not a topic that you can choose for your informative speech. So write down the topic pattern that you would want to use, if you could do it, in a simple sentence summarizing how you would do that, all right? And I'll give you an example in the thing, all right? So any questions, as always, you can contact me or with through Canvas or office hours, all right? Let me get back in here, how to sorts. All right, so have a good day, and keep going strong on Speech Week, guys.